action taken, there are consequences. Chaos theory. Anything that happens influences everything else that ever will happen. And there's always the intended consequence, which may or may not happen, and then there's the unintended consequences. For example, something that has bothered me or has hampered me in my adult life is a fear, or I don't know if it's necessarily a fear, but an anxiety-based thing about going into other people's houses, going into anywhere in general. And I know that it's going to be with me for the rest of my life, and I know that it's there, and I try to overcome it as best I can, but it's always going to be there. And it stems from when I was a kid. I was not allowed to go into other people's houses, which, so like, I'm talking neighborhood kids back in the day. Back in the good old 90s, kids would just run around the neighborhood and we'd just be running around the neighborhood all day, and it was fine. It was super healthy. But it was impressed upon me that going into the houses of my friends was 100% off limits. And the reason was that they would have TV on, and TV was evil, which many on the religious right would concur with. However, so I didn't go into other people's houses as a kid. I was not allowed. Most of the time, other people did not enter our house either. And it was always looked upon as a really weird, strange thing if any of my little friends came actually into our house. I don't think it was actually against any sort of rules, but it was definitely frowned upon. And yeah, it was definitely like we got in big trouble if we went into anybody else's house, because the TV might be on, and TV was the devil. So the intended consequence was that I would not be exposed to the influence of television, which, even as an adult now, I can agree that TV ain't great for kids. Whether for religious reasons, whether for, growth and development reasons, or just wasting freaking time, and numbing the mind. TV is fairly evil. I agree, 100%. So, in that sense, the action of not being able to go into anyone else's house in order to not be exposed to television was a fairly well-intended action, and it had the good consequence that I was not exposed to a lot of television, and therefore had to read books and be outside and develop an imagination and all that kind of stuff. Good. However, the unintended consequence is that for the rest of my life, I have this anxiety about going into other people's houses, and even just going through doors, if we're being honest. When I enter a store, anytime I go into anything, there's a certain anxiety that creeps up within me where I want to leave, go home as soon as possible. So that includes, shopping for groceries, going to a restaurant, going out on a date. Doesn't matter. If I go somewhere and go into a place, I have this fear that I'm not supposed to be there, that it's bad that I'm there. And I know it's not, and I know it's irrational, and I know exactly where it comes from, and it doesn't matter. I believe this is what is termed cellular fear. So it's been so ingrained into me that it's just something that no matter how aware of it I am, it's just never gonna leave. Now, places like I've just talked about, like stores and restaurants, it's not that pronounced. It's not that strong. Where it's the strongest is where it was most highly enforced in my childhood, which was the houses of my friends. And that sucks because, Kansas is a relatively country, very country kind of place where people just walk into each other's houses without knocking. People don't lock their doors, especially in small town Kansas. And people just walk over unannounced, and you can walk over to your friend's house and help yourself to making food in their kitchen without anybody batting an eye. And maybe not so much in Topeka where I live, but in the smaller towns, that's definitely a thing. And I'm like a vampire. I will not enter unless I am specifically invited. I will not go over to someone's house unless they invite me. I will not invite myself over. I will not usually just walk in, and while I am over at someone else's house, I will be very uncomfortable unless I'm drinking. And I gave up drinking a few years ago. So there's no really numbing that anxiety with alcohol. So shout out to my friends that invite me over, because I do my best to be social and get out and about and maintain friendships. And it really helps when people invite me. Hey, John, can you come over to my house and hang out? And then I say, sure, hell yeah, I'd love to come over and hang out. And then when I go over, I knock on the door and I wait for it to be answered. I don't like it when people yell from the kitchen, come on in. That me having to open the door and go into their house is, not cool with me. I'll do it, but it definitely gets the heart fluttering. Now, I don't live in my own house. I live in my friend's house. And this is a problem because in the place where I live, I still feel a little bit nervous every time I go in. And it's no bueno. But once I'm inside, I do feel more comfortable, especially when I'm down in my basement room and I got my dog there, I'm on my couch or something downstairs, and then it's a little better. Then I can really settle in. But once again, I'm still a little bit on edge unless I am on a dose of THC because that's my new vice since I quit drinking. So I guess the long and the short of it is that, yeah, there are always unintended consequences, and you just never know what they're going to be, and you never know how things are going to play out. And even the best intended actions have long-reaching effects into the future. Chaos theory. And yeah, this is a kind of weird one that I've got going on, but it's definitely a thing. And I think that's why maybe I love being outdoors and camping and sleeping under the stars so much, because that's my home.